So just diving right into this, last time we spoke about the fact that Baha'u'llah's final phase of his declaration, which was his proclamatory phase, the more open, the unveiling of his beauty, began essentially with addressing the community and his close companions. And we read excerpts and looked at his directives and his proclamation to his close companions in Surah Al-Ashab, as well as to a large extent, very parallel to that, was Surah-i-Haykal, the Surah of the Temple, that later became a preface or an introduction, if you will, to the series of his individual proclamation to the kings and rulers of the world, which was put together according to Baha'u'llah's wishes. Now, as I have always maintained in my presentations, that really the seminal work that began Baha'u'llah's final phase of his declaration was Surah-i-Muluk, or Surah-i-Muluk, as it's also referred to. The Guardian refers to both titles as Surah-i-Muluk and Surah-i-Muluk in his writings, and he transliterates it as well. And that can be translated as the Epistle to the Kings. So this work was truly a monumental work. It's been translated into English now in full translation. Excuse me. Our beloved Shoghi Effendi translated probably 2/3 of it in two of his major works. One, the Gleanings from the Writings of Baha'u'llah, a large section is included in there, and then there's another large section included in his 1941 general letter to the Baha'is of the West, entitled "The Promised Day Is Come," which is really an analysis of Baha'u'llah's proclamation to the kings and rulers and leaders of the religious community as well. So this to really go in depth into Surah-i-Muluk, it requires a course, and as Dr. Stockman mentioned, I'm intending to conduct a course sometime later this year, God willing, which we will delve more deeper and in more detail. It's truly a very multifaceted tablet, very, very rich in content. So certainly I will give you an overview of it and set the stage for that course. However, the Surah-i-Muluk was the beginning tablet, if you will, or one of his first open tablets to the kings, but there were many. So I like to take you through a PowerPoint presentation with that, but before that, I like to read an excerpt from an upcoming, God willing, in the next few years, a chapter of one of my works that it really that concentrates on Baha'u'llah's proclamatory letters, and then we will proceed. So as an introduction, Baha'u'llah's collective address to all the kings and political rulers of the world was made in 3 separate and distinct stages over a period of 7 years. Now, this is the final phase. So we talked about his declaration being in 3 stages, but his 3rd stage, his proclamatory or his proclamation, was also in 3 stages as well. Okay, so I just want you to be clear, and that was done over a period of 7 years. The first stage began with the indictment of the Surah-i-Muluk, a lengthy proclamatory document in Arabic, which was written in 1866 during Baha'u'llah's banishment to the Turkish city of Edirne. The second stage occurred in the last quarter of 1868, soon after Baha'u'llah arrived at the fortress prison city of Akka in Palestine. And the third and final stage of Baha'u'llah's collective summons to the kings of the earth came to pass in 1873 in the pages of his most important work, the Kitab-i-Aqdas, the Most Holy Book. Although in many of his later works, Baha'u'llah would continue to make indirect reference to the generality of the temporal rulers of the world, the tone and directness of these collective summons would remain the most explicit, challenging, and unique in the scope of his writings to this sector of global society. So according to historical documents and some clues offered by the text itself, the Surah-i-Muluk, or Surah-i-Muluk, was, as it's also known, was composed sometime between mid-March to late October of 1866. I'll make reference to this later on as well. It is in this awe-inspiring epistle that Baha'u'llah for the first time directs his words jointly to the entire company of the kings in the East and the West. Now, let's proceed with this presentation here. And now, I've entitled this Discovering the Mysteries of Divine Providence. It comes from the Mysteries of Divine Providence is a reference to the tablet by Baha'u'llah in the very first paragraph of the Surah-i-Muluk. But I will tell you in a little bit that the word providence, I don't believe it's the most correct, in my humble opinion, translation. Now, this is a translation that was not done by the Guardian. This is the translation, was a completing translation that was done under the direction of the Universal House of Justice. So it can be modified. It is by and large a very, very good translation. But sometimes certain, phrases can be retranslated to give it more of a more accuracy, if you will. But again, this is something from a scholarly point of view, not certainly from a liturgical and meditational and devotional point of view. So, but I just wanted to bring this up. I believe that it would be best if it was translated the mysteries of divine decree. The word qada is it's really about decree and rule than a providence. But again, there may have been other versions that the House may have looked at, or the committee that was at the World Center may have looked at. So there could be a good reason for this as well. But again, at this stage, based on the current publication, based on the words used in that, I don't believe providence is the best use of that, or the best translation, best interpretation of that phrase. Anyhow, let's look at this together. So the major works of Baha'u'llah in which kings and rulers of the world are summoned. Now, I've made a list of everything that we have in publication or was known in Baha'i history. Some of these works are not available, not some, but one or two of them are not available readily. The Guardian makes reference to a tablet that was revealed by Baha'u'llah and sent in the very moments after its revelation, as Baha'u'llah was being expelled from Istanbul to Edirne. And Nabil makes reference to it, and the Guardian has translated an excerpt from Nabil's unpublished chronicle referring to this, that this was Baha'u'llah had this sent and delivered to the Grand Vizier, the Prime Minister. And at that time, the Prime Minister was Muhammad Fuad Pasha. And I'll talk about some of the characters of the Ottomans as well, which is very important to know. And we will, in the other course, we will study them a lot closer and look at the roles that they played in the politics of that day and how it affected Baha'u'llah and the Baha'i community as well. So the first, the Loha Abdul Aziz va Wukala, the tablet to Sultan Abdul Aziz and his ministers. As the Guardian says, alas, we don't have the text of this tablet. And this tablet, because it was revealed in 1863, I don't believe that it has the same stature and the same direct message of Baha'u'llah's identity um, as the Surah-i-Muluk or any of the subsequent tablets that were revealed in this period, because this was still too early in 1863. It was still 3 years before that, and we have in 1864 Baha'u'llah still refers to in the Arabic tablet of Ahmad, that verily to the Bab, referring to the Bab, verily he is the king of the messengers, and his book is the mother book, did ye but know. So there's certainly the revelation of the Bab and his supremacy still being enunciated and being echoed in Baha'u'llah's writings in that period prior to the revelation of Surah-i-Muluk. Whereas this Lawh Abdulaziz wa Wukala that was revealed just before Baha'u'llah's departure in December of 1863, I don't believe it has the same content or the same proclamatory tone as the other tablets. It may very well be in the Ottoman archives. Our good friend Dr. Najati Al-Khan, who also teaches many courses at the Wilmette Institute, he has not found it, and he had done some extensive research at the Ottoman archives. He's Turkish himself, and also knows Arabic and Ottoman Turkish as well. So he had several years ago had unearthed some special manuscripts, but this Lawh Abdulaziz wa Wukala was not amongst them. So the Ottoman archives is very, very large and extensive, and it may take a researcher months and years to go through all of it. But in any event, so far, neither the Baha'i World Center nor any other center of studies has a copy of this Lawh Abdulaziz wa Wukala. So we don't know the content, we just have the gist of it based on Nabil's description of it, which is included in God Passes by Shari Effendi. So really the first major work, as I have always maintained, which really is the seminal work, is the Surah-i-Muluk, or Surah of the Kings. There is also in Adrianople period, there's two other works, very well-known works of Baha'u'llah were revealed, or very important works of Baha'u'llah. One was the first tablet to Napoleon III. It's a very small, shorter tablet, and then small excerpts of it has been translated by Shobri Effendi. There was a nice article and research by Ismail Velasco many years ago about the nature of its content and revelation. We don't have I believe it is available at the Baha'i World Center, but it has not been published, and several scholars, including myself, have requested copies of it, and the House have responded that it will be coming in future. But no one has the full text of this first tablet to Napoleon III that was revealed by Baha'u'llah from Adrianople. So the only thing we have about this particular tablet is the excerpt translated by Shobri Effendi in Promised Days Come. And that's essentially it's about a half a page. And it could very well be almost all the tablet, but again, we don't know much about this number 3 on the list. So number 1 is a mystery. Number 3 is a semi-mystery as well. Then number 4, in I guess in the chronology, I've tried to put them in chronological order, if you will, as far as when they were revealed. Lawh Sultan was revealed by Baha'u'llah. This is the tablet to Nasiruddin Shah, which, as we know, was famously, the messenger was Badi that took it in 1869. But Baha'u'llah revealed it in 1867, but did not disclose it to anyone. He actually makes mention of it to his companions, and there's an account of his companions wanting to be the messenger and pleading Baha'u'llah to give them that honor, and Baha'u'llah states that the messenger for this tablet has not yet been created by God. and Badi became that new creation when he came and visited Baha'u'llah and attained his presence, while Baha'u'llah was immured in the army barracks, soon after his arrival in Akka. So he was in solitary confinement in the army barracks. So the room, the solitary confinement room of Baha'u'llah, which is a place of pilgrimage in Akka, that's when Badi came and attained the presence of Baha'u'llah and became a new creation, and then became the messenger, was entrusted with the Lawh Sultan, and he took it in the summer of 1869. It was delivered there. So it was revealed in 1867 by Baha'u'llah, but was delivered in 1869 to the Shah. Then there is the Surah-i-Rais. There are actually two tablets that have the title of Rais to them, and we have them in translation. One is referred to as Lawh-i-Rais, the other one is Surah-i-Rais. Surah-i-Rais, both of them are addressed to the Turkish Prime Minister Muhammad Amin Ali Pasha, and who was the Grand Vizier and Foreign Minister under two of the sultans, which I will get to who he was, and he was a central figure in the Ottoman, sort of late modern Ottoman period. And this one was revealed by Baha'u'llah during his exile from Edirne en route to Akka, and it was revealed near the port of Gallipoli. So this the Surah-i-Rais, and it's in Arabic. The next tablet that was revealed by Baha'u'llah is called Lawh-i-Rais, and that's the Persian version. Well, I shouldn't say the Persian version, but it's another addressed to Ali Pasha, which is revealed in Persian, and it is a magnificent tablet where Baha'u'llah refers to some of his childhood memories and that puppet show, and it's truly a magnificent tablet, but that one was revealed in Persian. So we only have two of Baha'u'llah's tablets to the kings and rulers that have been revealed in Farsi. One is Lawh Sultan, which half of it almost is in Arabic, the other half in Persian, and then this Lawh-i-Rais, which is in Persian, but everything else is revealed in the language of eloquence, as I mentioned last time, which is Arabic. So the next phase, as we talked about, so there were three tablets revealed really during the Adrianople period: Surah-i-Muluk, the first tablet to Napoleon III, and then the Lawh Sultan, Baha'u'llah's legendary tablet, which is the lengthiest of all of his tablets to individual monarchs, and that one was revealed in 1867 as well. So though there were three tablets revealed in Adrianople, the rest were revealed soon after Baha'u'llah's arrival in Akka. So it would have been in this the last quarter of 1868, possibly to some degree in the first quarter or so of 1869. So this second tablet to Napoleon III, Lawh Saniya Napoleon Sevom, as it's known in Persian, it's also known as Lawh Melek Baris, was revealed in Akka, and it's a very famous tablet in which Baha'u'llah says that we tested him, the king, Napoleon III, and found him to be insincere, and he foreshadows his doom and downfall in that tablet. And there's a tablet to Pope Pius IX, who was the longest reigning pope in the history of papacy. These all have so much history and so many ramifications that are so much connected on the political scene in the 19th century that really deserves a whole analysis and a whole book on this. So lots of very exciting things about them. Then Lawh Melek Rus, the tablet to Tsar of Russia, Nikolaevich Alexander II of Russia. That was, I made mention of it briefly about what Baha'u'llah says, that his representative, Prince Dmitry Ivanovich Dolgorukov, had extended his assistance and interceded on behalf of Baha'u'llah while Baha'u'llah was in the Siyah-Chal. There's a reference to that in the opening lines of this tablet to the Tsar of Russia. Lohem Malekeh, or the tablet to Queen Victoria, is also a great tablet as well, revealed during that first stage of Baha'u'llah's arrival in Akka, or in the second phase of his proclamation, as well as Lohe Fuad, the tablet to Fuad Pasha, who was the prime minister for a great many of the years of Baha'u'llah's exile, and also was a colleague of Ali Pasha as well. I'll make some references to him as well. And all right, so I think I have not, in this list, I have not made mention of Tablet of Rais, then, the Lohe Rais. I don't see it there, but maybe that's something that I could add to it. So there are basically 12, if you will, that address the king, 11 being the part of the proclamatory, the first one that was revealed in Constantinople really doesn't fit with the genre and the message of these tablets, but because it was addressed to Sultan Abdulaziz and his ministers, it's obviously needs to be included in this list. Now, to give you a little bit of a background about the Ottomans, and there is a reason why we need to know more about the Ottoman government, essentially, and rulers during this period, because they were instrumental in Baha'u'llah's banishment, and Baha'u'llah was the citizen of the Ottoman Empire and was essentially a prisoner, became a prisoner of the Ottoman Empire, during his incarceration and his banishment to Akka particularly. And in the Surah-i-Muluk, Surah-i-Muluk has about 118 paragraphs, which the House of Justice, they have paginated and made it into paragraphs. So out of this 118 paragraphs, almost half of it is addressed to the Sultan himself directly, to his ministers, to this, to the city of Constantinople, and to the divines of the city of Constantinople. So essentially, half of the tablet is addressed to them. The other half is addressed to other groups, which I have made a list of it, and I will present it to you at the end of this presentation. So it is very important to know about the monarchy, the Ottoman monarchy, and without going into detail, essentially the principal characters that you would need to know, and the 19th century Ottoman or the modern Ottoman Empire began really with Sultan Mahmud II. Mahmud is often referred to as the Peter the Great of the Ottomans, in the same way that Peter the Great modernized the Russian Empire. Mahmud II modernized and set the stage for modernization of the Ottoman Empire, and his next two successors being his eldest and the second eldest son, who respectively became Sultan Abdul-Majid the first and Sultan Abdul-Aziz, carried their father's reforms, if you will. And this reform was known as Tanzimat, which the Tanzimat era. And the word Tanzim or Tanzimat means reordering. or reestablishing order, if you will. And that began in 1839 under Sultan Abdul Majid. Now, Abdul Majid was the eldest son of Mahmud, came to power, in the 1839 essentially, and lived till 1861. He was a monarch that the Bab has also addressed and sent a messenger who never made it to deliver the message to Sultan. I believe it was Mullah Ali Bastami that we have. It was one of the very early martyrs of the Babi era. Abdul Majid was a great reformer, and he did a lot of great things. But he also bolstered his presence and his stature amongst the Europeans. During his reign, it was the very famous Crimean War that took place in the 1850s, which essentially England and France came to the assistance of Turkey in his war with Russia, and eventually Russia was defeated. But it was a futile war, and not much came of it. But it solidified the relationship between France and Turkey, and France and England as well. So it was during his reign, and that took place. Now, going back to the Tanzimat, or the reordering, or the reforms of the Ottoman Empire, there were three Grand Viziers that were associated essentially with. One was Mustafa Rashid Pasha, who was the eldest of the next two, and then the next one in line was Muhammad Amin Ali Pasha, which the Surah-i-Rais and Loh-i-Rais is addressed to, and then Muhammad Fuad Pasha as well. Now, Mustafa Rashid Pasha was there when the Tanzimat was first inaugurated in the late 1830s, and he was the prime minister until 1850, late 1850s. I believe he passed away in 1858, and from then on, the prime ministership kind of swung between Ali Pasha and Fuad Pasha. At the time of the passing of Sultan Abdul Majid in 1861, Sultan Abdul Aziz, who became the new sultan, and who was the second son of Mahmud, Sultan Mahmud, and the younger brother of Sultan Majid, Abdul Majid, he instated Fuad Pasha as his prime minister. Fuad was also a very able person. Both Ali Pasha and Fuad Pasha were very well respected by the Europeans. They both spoke fluent French and spoke English as well, and they were Western educated to some degree, and so they were considered by the Western monarchies and governments as the best persons to interface with the Ottoman Empire. So Sultan Abdul Aziz, who came to power in 1861, brought Fuad Pasha as his prime minister. So in 1863, when Baha'u'llah was banished from Constantinople, the prime minister was Fuad Pasha, in fact. And then he remained the prime minister. He served 2 full terms as a prime minister, as a Grand Vizier, until 1866, where he resigned over a political issue that he disagreed with the Sultan. But then he became the foreign minister, and Ali Pasha became the prime minister. Now, both of these men, the last 2 of these Grand Viziers, died soon after the revelation of these letters One, Fuad Pasha, passed away in Nice in 1869, Nice, France, in 1869. And then Ali Pasha also passed away in 1871. And some of these may have been caused, well, may, again, if you believe Baha'u'llah's words, which we all do, of course, that their downfall came, because of their opposition and their hostility towards Baha'u'llah. In fact, in the tablet, the Lawh Fuad, the tablet to Fuad Pasha, it is quite a challenging tablet in which Baha'u'llah makes reference to the soul and the spirit of Fuad burning in hell. And this is a tablet that was revealed in honor of one of Baha'u'llah's companions, Sheikh Kazim Samandar, the father of the late Hand of the Cause of God, Tarazullah Samandari, one of the great servants of the faith. But this tablet of Fuad was actually addressed, was revealed in honor of Sheikh Kazim, but a large section of it is addressed to Fuad Pasha. That's why it's known as the Lawh Fuad. And we have it in the summons of the Lord of Hosts in full translation. So the principal characters, the two sultans, Abdul Majid and Abdul Aziz, were the sultans during the reign of during the ministry of Baha'u'llah, early ministry. There was a Sultan Abdul Hamid that it was actually Sultan Abdul Hamid II. He succeeded Abdul Aziz in 1878, roughly. After, actually, he did not succeed him directly for a few months. The first son of Sultan Abdul Majid, Murad, became Murad V, but he was only in power for a month or two, and then there was a coup, and Sultan Abdul Hamid was who was the second son of Abdul Majid, became the ruler, and he's the one who ruled a very long time till essentially the early part of the 20th century, and he's the one that is famously known for his spies and his eccentricity, and the one that Abdul Baha makes reference to, and he was the one that had sent investigating commissions to investigate Abdul Baha, and that had brought Abdul Baha's house arrest and so on, and with the young Ottoman Turks revolution in 1909, 1909, I believe it was, that all the political prisoners, including Abdul Baha, were released, and so it was that sultan that was deposed with the Ottoman, the Young Turks Revolution. Anyhow, so this is just a little bit of a background. You can read about him a little bit more. So let's move into Surah-i-Muluk. So Shoghi Effendi, in his general letter to the Baha'is of the West, dated March 28, 1941, and entitled "The Promised Days Come," writes, "It should not be forgotten that it was the kings of the earth and the world's religious leaders who, above all other categories of men, were made the direct recipients of the message proclaimed by both the Bab and Baha'u'llah. It was they who were deliberately addressed in numerous and historic tablets, who were summoned to respond to the call of God, and to whom were directed in clear and forcible language the appeals, the admonitions, and warnings of his persecuted messengers. A small wonder," the Guardian goes on to say, "then, that the author of the Baha'i faith, and to a lesser degree its herald, should have directed at the world's supreme rulers and religious leaders the full force of their message, and made them the recipients of some of their most sublime tablets, and invited them in a language at once clear and insistent to heed their call. Now, the reference that the Guardian makes to the proclamation of the Bab, oftentimes the friends may not be aware of, but the Bab declared his message. When he declared his message on that evening of May 22nd, 1844, in the presence of Mullah Hussein Abu Shri, that night of power and excellence that we all celebrate, and it's historically recorded as such. He revealed the first chapter of Qayyum al-Asma, which is known as Surah-i-Muluk, or the chapter of dominion, the first chapter of 111 chapters of the Qayyum al-Asma, the commentary on the Surah of Joseph, as it's also known. So in that first chapter, the Bab, in fact, which was revealed that night, he proclaims his message to the kings and rulers. And excerpts of it have been translated in selections from the writings of the Bab. So that very night that he declared, he proclaimed his mission and his message to the kings and rulers of the world. And here, Baha'u'llah also makes reference to that night. We'll come to it in a second. So Baha'u'llah's collective address to all the kings and political rulers of the world was made in 3 separate and distinct stages, as we said, over a period of 7 years. The first stage, okay, so we're going to look at the various stages of this because these are part of his declaration. The first stage began with the revelation of Surah-i-Muluk, as I said, a lengthy tablet in Arabic in 1866. And why it's 1866, I'm going to make reference to it. The next, in stage 2, as we said, occurred in the last quarter of 1868, soon after Baha'u'llah's arrival at the fortress prison city of Akka in Palestine, and may have continued well into the 1869, as I mentioned as well. The third and final stage of Baha'u'llah's collective summons to the kings of the earth came to pass in 1873 in the pages of the Kitab-i-Aqdas. I always found it remarkable that there is a good chunk, and a large percentage, perhaps 20% of the Kitab-i-Aqdas is Baha'u'llah's proclamation to the kings and rulers. The style and the manner in which the Kitab-i-Aqdas has been revealed, Baha'u'llah says, it amazeth the mind of mankind. Man, it really amazed me because, Baha'u'llah, as you have seen in the Kitab-i-Aqdas, it's addressing a certain law and then goes on to something completely different, which makes it very, very unique. And the address to the kings and rulers are in the Kitab-i-Aqdas, a large section of it as well. So we spoke about the first stage of Surah-i-Muluk, that being that it's the first time that Baha'u'llah addressed the kings and rulers of the world collectively. Now, I just want to give you a map. This is a map of the Europe, which really was the geopolitical center of the rulers of the world, because at that time most of the world was ruled by these nations. It was the age of colonialism, so the largest empire was the British Empire, which there was a saying back then that the sun never sets on the British Empire because it had the colonies as far places as New Zealand and Australia, to places in the West Indies, and in Asia, in India was under the rule of the of the British rule. So here, when you look at it, you have the Ottoman Empire, then you have the Austro-Hungarian Empire, you have the Prussian, which was a German empire, and then it became, and there was essentially a confederation of German principalities, if you will, which eventually was united after the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. So Prussia became the dominant and united all Germany, became the German Empire. And then the French Empire, there was the Spanish Empire. So in this is dated 3rd of July 1866. So this is around the time that Baha'u'llah revealed the Surah-i-Muluk. This was the map of Europe, if you will. There's Russia, the Ottoman Empire, and then you have the kingdom of Italy. The new kingdom of Italy had been established. The papal state had kind of shrunk, and then you had the French Empire and the British Empire as well. So there's a reason why Baha'u'llah addresses most of his proclamations to to the leaders of these nations, because they effectively ruled the world amongst all of them. So there was no king of China, or there was Africa was pretty much carved out by essentially the German Empire, the French Empire, and the British Empire. So again, there was no independent ruler of Africa, if you will. So by addressing these European rulers, addressing all the kings and rulers of the world. So major influential monarchs of the Western world in 1866: Emperor Franz Joseph Habsburg, Austro-Hungarian Emperor Napoleon III, which brought in the Second French Empire. He was the nephew of the great Napoleon I, but he was not as influential as his uncle. In fact, Victor Hugo, the great French writer, did not like Napoleon III and called him Small Napoleon, Napoleon Petit. King Victor Emmanuel of Italy, Emperor Alexander II of Russia, Queen Isabella of Spain. Spain was not very significant at the time. It was pretty much politically controlled by the other nations. Queen Victoria obviously presided over the great British Empire, Great Britain, and Ireland. And Emperor Wilhelm I was the Prussian-German emperor, had a very able and autocratic prime minister, Otto von Bismarck, who really shaped most of the second half of the European political system, if you will. And then Pope Pius IX, or Pio Nono, he was the Pope for most of the greater part of the ministry of Baha'u'llah. I believe Leo XIII was his successor. Sultan Abdul Aziz of the Ottoman Empire, and then Nasruddin Shah. So again, and there for some of you, the photos of this Emperor Franz Joseph Habsburg, 1848 to 1916, that was his reign. Napoleon III, 1852 to 1870, the Second French Empire. King Victor Emmanuel of Italy. Emperor Alexander II, this is one of the early portraits of him. He did not look this good by the end of his reign. And there were many assassination attempts on his life, and eventually they got to him, and he was assassinated and killed in 1881. Queen Isabella of Spain, and then this is a great portrait of Queen Victoria, who was one of the longest reigning monarchs. In fact, she was the longest monarch until our current Queen Elizabeth II. I think she's going to beat Queen Victoria, her great-grandmother, and she ruled from 1837 to 1901. In fact, his her rather, crown prince was an old man by the time he came to power and became the king. So. And just a note to you for some of the Baha'i friends, it was the Queen of Romania who became a Baha'i, was the granddaughter of Queen Victoria, was the daughter of one of Queen Victoria's daughters, and was married to the Romanian prince and king. So again, Queen Victoria, her progeny, really at some point, almost all of Europe were related to her during the late 19th century, early 20th century. So again, very interesting to discuss on a political perspective. Emperor William I of Russia, 1861 to 1888. In 1888, it was actually, they call it the year of the three emperors, because his son, Emperor Frederick, he was suffering from throat cancer at the time, and he did not last more than a few months, and then the Kaiser Wilhelm the second became the emperor, the young Kaiser, and that's the Kaiser that was essentially the famous Kaiser that we hear in the World War I, and he ruled, and he was the grandson of Queen Victoria, because Wilhelm's son Frederick married the eldest daughter of Queen Victoria, and they had a child, and that child became the Emperor Wilhelm II and the Great Kaiser that we've heard in historical documents, and there's even footage of him and some film for First World War. And then Pope Pius IX here, we talked about, and this Sultan Abdul Aziz of the Ottoman Empire. This is a photo. There's a couple of photos of Abdul Aziz that was taken when he traveled to Western Europe in 1867. He went to France and to UK, and he was the guest of Queen Victoria. His reign, he was deposed in 1876. And then he was under palace arrest, if you will, till 1878, and he committed suicide. Some have said that he was assassinated, but there are evidence for both. But he died in 1878 as a result of his wrist being slashed. But that's again a whole new story to discuss and to talk about in more detail. And Nasruddin Shah of Qajar dynasty, it was the longest reigning Qajar king. There's a wonderful chapter, or at least an appendix, in Baha'u'llah, King of Glory, Mr. Balyuzi's book, that's called it's entitled "The Disastrous Reign of Nasruddin Shah," and I recommend highly everyone read that. It's wonderfully written, with great deal of historical details and analysis, and it really shows the whole picture of why this individual was so notorious, and the Guardian calls him imperious, avaricious, conniving. I mean, there are a lot of appellations that he's been given, and Baha'u'llah had castigated him as the tyrannical king as well, and he was really a corrupt man. He even used to drink, and it was lecherous, and it just it could be a great subject of many Hollywood films, because his life was somewhat scandalous, and especially when he came to the West. He made 2 visits to the West in 1873 and 5 years later in 1878. Again, there are some accounts. In fact, Queen Victoria, in her memoirs, speaks of his trip to her country, and and she was not impressed by him at all. All right, now Baha'u'llah begins the Surah of the Kings by introducing himself to the world's monarchs and inviting them to read his message with sincerity and open-mindedness. Now, one of the things that I found with the Surah-i-Muluk, that, you know, God does this magnificent play on words, and also really comes out and directly addresses that the recipients in such a incredible way, and it's very poignant to mention some of the things that may not be immediately apparent to the Western reader. Baha'u'llah begins, and I have an excerpt of the first few lines of the Surah al-Muluk in Arabic here. So Baha'u'llah, the opening invocation is Huwa al-Aziz. Now, if you know, I just mentioned, the Sultan's name was Abdul Aziz. Abdul Aziz means the servant, because servant of God, servant of Aziz, which is one of the attributes of God. So Baha'u'llah opens this tablet, which is addressed to, also in great part, almost half of the tablet is addressed to the Ottoman Sultan and his government, with Huwa al-Aziz. He's in fact reminding him that who is Aziz, and you are Abdul Aziz. He says the God is Aziz, the all glorious, is a very famous phrase. An attribute is one of the names of God, is Aziz, and he is Abdul Aziz. So he says, هو العزيز هذا كتاب من هذا العبد الذي سمي بالحسين في ملكوت الأسماء إلى ملوك الأرض كلهم أجمعين. So this is the very first line of Baha'u'llah's tablet to the kings, which has been translated as He is the Almighty. This is a tablet from this servant who is called Hussein in the kingdom of names to the concourse of the kings of the earth. Do you recall in Surah Al-Ashab, he also has a very similar introduction. He introduces himself that this is the Hussein who's now, that he is Ali, who's now in the mantle of Hussein. And so he introduces himself by his first name. And it's very touching, and he shows his humility, but yet you will see his power and grandeur, and because of his mission, is also addressed here. So this is a tablet from this servant who is called Hussein in the kingdom of names to the concourse of the kings of the earth. Happily they may approach it in a spirit of open-mindedness, discover from its message the mysteries of divine providence or the mysteries of divine decree, and be of those that comprehend its meaning, and perchance they may forsake all they possess, turn towards the retreats of holiness, and draw nigh unto God, the all-glorious, the incomparable. So that's the first paragraph of the Surah al-Muluk. In the second paragraph of the Surah-i-Muluk, Baha'u'llah, in an exalted and challenging language, discloses the divine character of his mission and exhorts the monarchs to abandon their ways and follow the path set by God for them. He proclaims, O kings of the earth, and this has been translated by Shoghi Effendi. The first paragraph was not translated by the Guardian, and the House of Justice included it in the translation, which we now have, the complete translation, in the Summons of the Lord of Hosts. So this is the part that the Guardian has quoted, and it's, I believe, both in the Promised Days Come as well as the Gleanings. O kings of the earth, give ear unto the voice of God calling from this sublime, this fruit-laden tree that hath sprung out of the crimson hill upon the holy plain, intoning the words, there is none other God but He, the mighty, the all-powerful, the all-wise. This is a spot which hath been sanctified by God for those who approach it, a spot wherein His voice may be heard from the celestial tree of holiness. Fear God, O concourse of kings, and suffer not yourselves to be deprived of this most sublime grace. Fling away then the things ye possess, and take fast hold on the handle of God, the exalted, the great. Set your hearts towards the face of God, and abandon that which your desires have bidden you to follow, and be not of those who perish. Baha'u'llah then reproaches the kings for ignoring the divine summons made to them by the Bab when the latter proclaimed his God-given mandate over a decade earlier. Speaking with the voice of God, Baha'u'llah directs his pen to remind the kings of the Bab's call unto them and their failure to heed his message. He writes, "Relate unto them, O servant, the story of Ali when he came unto them with truth, bearing his glorious and weighty book, and holding in his hands a testimony and proof from God, and holy and blessed tokens from him. Ye, however, O kings, have failed to heed the remembrance of God in his days, and be guided by the lights which arose and shone forth above the horizon of a resplendent heaven. Ye examine not his cause, when so to do would have been better for you than all that the sun shineth upon, could ye but perceive it. Ye remained careless until the divines of Persia, those cruel ones, pronounced judgment against him, and unjustly slew him. His spirit ascended unto God, and the eyes of the inmates of paradise, and the angels that are nigh unto him wept sore by reason of this cruelty. Beware that ye be not careless henceforth, as ye have been careless aforetime. Return then unto God, your Maker, and be not of the heedless." So after referencing the Bab's call to the kings, Baha'u'llah continues in the Surah-i-Muluk to challenge the world monarchs by telling them that God has chosen him now as the point to which they must all turn. He states that their true glory will be in their obedience to God's command and not in their attachment to their transient sovereignty. I just want to make a couple of observations here, and I know we've kind of at the end of our time here, is that the Surah-i-Muluk set upon the world and upon its monarchs a challenge by God, that this challenge, the denial of this challenge, led to one of the greatest catastrophes that the human history has ever witnessed, and that was the Great War, the First World War, and subsequently the Second World War. And in recent, I would say in the last 50 years, most historians are now believe conclusively that the reason, the impact, or the reason, or what led, the cause that led to the First World War was really the arms race that began in the 1860s with Germany, France, and Britain, that essentially led to this very fragile peace that blanketed the all of Europe, and in some way it was a Cold War of sort, if you will, because essentially there were all sorts of alliances and ententes that they made in the second half of the 20th century to prevent any wars, and eventually it was so fragile and it was so volatile. And Abdu'l-Baha, during his European and North American trips, he alludes to it. He says the world is on the brink of war, and it was not something that Abdu'l-Baha was seeing through the future. I know, obviously, he had that foresight, but it was very evident that a war of some sort was going to take place. Now, most nations, most governments knew there was going to be a war, but they didn't think it was going to be to this magnitude, and with this tragedy, and with this level of abomination that was going to, wreak upon humanity, and with the casualties and horrors that it brought about, and it really changed the world, and it set about a very, very dark precedent in the history of humanity. So this is something that I believe, and The Guardian obviously believed, and future historians who are fair will show without a shadow of a doubt that resulted as a result of disobedience and careless disregard to Baha'u'llah's message that he very explicitly in the Surah-i-Muluk set upon the kings. He talks about their arms race. He tells that you're amassing, weapons of war, that it's going to lead to destruction. And then he foreshadows their doom, and he says their monarchies will come to an end. And by the beginning of the 20th century, most of those monarchies, and after the First World War, essentially the whole political scene of the world changed. These nations became more republican and democratic, and the monarchy was brought down. And Ottoman Empire went to dust after the First World War. Austro-Hungarian Empire went to dust, and the German Empire went to dust. I mean, these were all just, if one is to be fair, was a direct result of disobedience to God's directives and God's plan, that He wanted the monarchs and the sovereigns of the world to spearhead this great peace, and which He said that was very achievable. And when we think about it, it was very achievable, because they pretty much controlled all of the world, but they were so overtaken by their own vanities, and they were so blinded by material prosperity that they had just begun to experience, not knowing that prosperity had been unleashed through the powers of the revelation. Just to talk about the Ottomans, Sultan Abdul Majid spent tremendous amount of money to build this palace, which is right on the Sea of Marmara, right on the Bosphorus. It's called the Dolmabahce. And today, when you go, it's this marble, beautiful white palace that he moved his residence from Topkapi Palace to this Dolmabahce, which is a museum now. But one of the greatest chandeliers in the world is hanging in the Dolmabahce. The opulence of it is just out of this world. That how the wealth of, and then yet most of these nations, their citizens were poor and were suffering. So it was really the injustice of these kings and rulers that brought about their downfall. And again, we can talk about Baha'u'llah's ominous prophecies that came true, and led to some people like Mirza Abul Fazl, the great Baha'i scholar, to embrace the faith because of that. But this Baha'u'llah's public proclamation is perhaps one of the most important directives that this manifestation of God set in motion for all of humanity. And we still today are feeling its repercussions. And the governments of the world today, with all the wars that's still raging, and the suffering is because they did not take heed in Baha'u'llah's and God's admonishments. So it gives us a lot of pause. I think we can draw so much. I've found this in my own personal journey of a great source of inspiration, because it really gives us perspective of what our faith and what the supreme manifestation of God came and did, and how the events of today still is governed by some of the disobedience and the lack of the proper direction that some of these leaders have taken place. And the humanity still is paying for it, and will continue to pay for it until it really brings itself in accordance to God's will and purpose. Anyways, on that note, I thank you for the opportunity that I've had to share with you these thoughts over this last 6 webinars. I believe that the 3 stages of Baha'u'llah's declaration is very significant for us to recognize. It gives us perspective more into the understanding of the revelation, and how it's redemptive, as the Guardian says, the redemptive scheme or plan was unfolded. So thank you very much for that time, and the time that we've shared together, and I look forward to sharing online with you some further thoughts and questions, as well as this upcoming course in November. And if you liked what you saw or heard, we'll be going in greater detail and examining this great, magnificent work of Baha'u'llah, this proclamatory work of Baha'u'llah, in November. So I think, I believe, one other slide I have here for those of you, a list of addresses in the Surah-i-Muluk. There's about, I have determined that there are 16 addressees, if you will. First, the kings of the earth, paragraph 1 to 14, kings of Christendom, paragraphs 15 to 16 and 20 to 22, so they're interspersed. Minister of the King of Paris, which, in our faith, or in the Baha'i writings, there's never been mention of who he is. We know who he is. His name was Lionel Marquis de Moustier. He later became, under Napoleon III, the French foreign minister. But again, he died a year before the demise of the Second Empire as well. The people, or the people of the world, if you will, ministers of the Sultan, who in this case would be Fuad Pasha and Ali Pasha, birds of holiness, inhabitants of the city of Istanbul, king being Sultan Abdulaziz, ministers of the Shah, or rather minister of the Shah in the city, and this is Mirza Hossein Khan Moshir-ud-Dowleh. Again, great many references to him. I think we made references. He was the Shah's representative in the Ottoman court for a number of years, and later became the Shah's prime minister, his foreign minister, and then the prime minister. And he was really responsible for all of him, along with the Ottoman Grand Viziers and others. But he was the main force behind Baha'u'llah's banishment from Baghdad, and later to Edirne, as well as to finally to Akka. And people of malice is the one Baha'u'llah addresses in paragraph 86 to 95. People of Persia, congregation of my ill-wishers, divines of the city of Istanbul, and finally, I believe, wise men of the city and the philosophers of the world. I believe that is the last, or is there? No, a couple more. The learned of the world, paragraph 115 to 117, and concourse of the faithful, which are the believers, the companions. So he addresses the companions at the closing paragraph of the Surah-i-Muluk. I believe that is it for us. Dr. Stockman, if you can come and help us close here, that would be wonderful.
Good. Yeah, I'm back. I actually came on and then you started flipping through more slides, so I went away again.
Okay.
I wasn't really quite sure when you were coming to an end. Thank you so much, Shahrokh. This has really been really amazing. It's been very valuable for me just to see the list of tablets Baha'u'llah sent and what we know about each one. I've often gotten confused as to whether the Surah-i-Muluk included the tablet to Napoleon, included the tablet to Victoria and all that, because, well, I think Summons the Lord of Hosts partly confused me too because of the way things were bundled there. And
Yes.
so I'm really grateful that you laid this out and made it so clear to everybody how it works, and I look forward to your webinar in November when we go through the tablet. And
one note about your question about the Surah-i-Muluk. The friends will find that and it was actually very puzzling for me. Well, not puzzling in the sense, I mean, but he doeth whatsoever he willeth, and we have no right to question it. Baha'u'llah in his surah, in his tablet, which he entitled Lohe-Heikal, which had the Surah-i-Heikal plus all these individual letters, it does not include Surah-i-Muluk. Now, I believe there's several reasons to that. First of all, Surah-i-Muluk is very lengthy. I mean, it's 50 pages in English, much longer than any of the other tablets by themselves, and it really constituted its own unique station. So. And again, that's my personal conjecture on that. That really it would have been just way too much to just put them all into, and then to form a human temple out of it. I think God knew the proportions of that, perhaps, that it would have worked better with the Surah-i-Heikal plus the other letters to the kings as well. So that's the thing. You're right. That in the Summons of the Lord of Hosts, Surah-i-Muluk is actually at the very end, and and that could be confusing for some. Maybe in future, if it could be rearranged and a more chronological, it would dispel that confusion. But yes, it should be the very first one, in the book, but it's the last one.
I think the other thing that confused me also is I don't know what the plural for surah is. But Muluk is plural, and so I immediately start thinking these as tablets to the kings, tablet to the kings, and so that's another reason why I got confused.
Yes. Well, the surah is singular, plural is suvar, as it says in Persian, or surat, in Arabic maybe. Again, I got to check my grammar there, but it's. Yes, it's surah by itself is singular. So so it's a that's why I like to translate it as the epistle to the kings. Because there were many epistles or many tablets, but this is the epistle to the kings that was collective.
Yeah, that's very helpful for me also to have that. I'm waiting to see if people have some questions. We still don't have any questions that have come in, so I'm hoping we will generate some. We do have an audience, of course, of several people who have been watching and I'm sure enjoying the presentation quite a bit. And apparently they all had audio and everything. That seems to have worked out fine. So what else did I want to ask you about this? Since it's an epistle to the kings, it doesn't actually specify kings in that particular tablet. So the tablets that are to specific kings, obviously, are the other tablets.
Yes.
So this particular tablet, you mentioned a long list of people who are addressed.
Yes.
But
as far as the kings are concerned, the kings of the earth and the kings of Christendom are referred to in this tablet.
Right.
And this is essentially as I said to you, the main body of monarchs in Europe that really wielded the power, the global power at that time. So and then he addresses the king of of the Ottoman Empire. As the king, he refers to him as Sultan, which is Sultan Abdulaziz. But he does not address any other king individually. So in a way, Surah-i-Muluk is also his individual letter to Sultan Abdulaziz as well. So, in some ways, it includes that. Now, in some of the other tablets, it's worth mentioning, like, for example, the tablet to Queen Victoria, he also addresses collectively the kings of the world again. So he does. And there is 2 other tablets in my book, and in my, God willing, if I get a chance to write the book, but I will mention, because it's also in there's small passages in some of the contemporary tablets. For example, there is a tablet not well known in the West, which is in Arabic, called Ridwanul Adl, the Paradise of Justice. Incredible tablet. Only a couple of sentences of it has been translated in the Gleanings, and in that, Baha'u'llah actually, in one small paragraph, addresses the kings, and that's around. And I believe that kind of is before the revelation of the Kitab Aqdas. And then also he addresses the kings collectively again in the Kitab Aqdas, O Conquerors of the Kings. And then he addresses them in a wonderful, he tells them that they are the emblems of his sovereignty. I always found that to be magnificent, that God's sovereignty, these kings were designated as the emblems. God has elevated the station of the kings very high. In fact, in the Loh Sultan, Baha'u'llah says that the king is the shadow of God on earth. So the station of kinghood is and a monarch is very much something that is loved by God. But these people really were not worthy. They didn't make themselves worthy of it, But he says, again, in another tablet, he says that ultimately God wishes that the position of kingship be maintained. This is why he makes mention of the fact that God prefers constitutional monarchy, like the form of government that we have in the UK now is something that's preferred by God. In his tablets he says that. So there is, and he says in future there will be kings, but they will have to have the humility of it, to achieve that station. So, anyways, so it's very fast. It's all very fascinating.
It is, really is. We still don't have any other questions, and I suppose we should give people another minute or two to see if they can.
Maybe they're in a bit of a shock from all the pronouncements of God. It is very jarring. Reading this, it stirs within anyone. I remember each time I've read these many times, but each time I read them, it invokes such awe and somewhat fear too. Fear for these monarchs who just ignore it. If they really knew what they were ignoring, wow, how could they have ignored Baha'u'llah? But they did, and exactly. they were reduced to dust, and so. Well,
yes, you've encouraged me to sit down with Summons the Lord of Hosts and reread the tablet, because I haven't read it really in quite a long time, and I'll have to sit down and reread it again.
Please do.
Doug and Carol say, no questions, but I do thank you for all your work to bring this to us, and I think there's quite a few people who share that sentiment as well.
Well, you're welcome. My pleasure. My pleasure.
It's really quite a remarkable marathon here of 6 video sessions about the stages of Baha'u'llah's declaration, and certainly we've all learned an immense amount as a result that we had no idea we could acquire this information before, especially considering how much of it already was available if you just pull it together. And I must say, Shahrokh, I'm very impressed by how you can recognize the name in God Passes By and the name in a tablet and somewhere else and pull it all together and say this is the same person. This is the kind of detail work that really helps to bring the story together, and I'm very grateful for your work
and for your acknowledgement, and it's my pleasure. You know, my hope is really to generate interest. You know, there is so much. You know, the ocean of Baha'u'llah's revelation is so rich and so profound and so deep that, you know, if we immerse ourselves as he asks us to do, you know, we will become so enlightened and so blessed by it. And I just found that, you know, this was one facet that I could share with the friends, and hopefully it had a positive impact.
Good. Well, I think we probably should wrap up at this point. Again, thank you so much for giving us this brilliant course, and I'm sure many of us will be looking forward to the course in November about this tablet in considerably more detail. And perhaps we can invite you back to do another web talk to give that class a little bit of an extra push, since the web talks seem to have been very effective in building the audience. So we'll have to talk about that further and see if we can schedule that.
Sure.
But again, thank you so much, Shahrokh, and thank you everybody for participating, for your questions, and your really dedicated interest in this whole topic. And I look forward to seeing further discussion online about this, and then, of course, moving on to the fall, seeing this new course being offered. So thanks, and have a good day, everybody.